Hello, it's a pleasure to be here presenting some of my thoughts on the set of macroeconomic trends that the global economy has been witnessing before COVID-19 and also how the global pandemic has shaped them. I will highlight three trends that have already had and will have a significant influence on business success, and then I will suggest a couple of factors that companies can use to try to adapt to these trends. Now, let me start with the three trends. First, I want to highlight the shift of the world economy towards the east, towards Asia. The center of gravity of the world has been shifting to the east now for many decades. If you look at emerging markets in Asia, they represent today a larger share of the world economic activity than Europe of the US. Now, that's in contrast with what we had in 1980 when Europe and the US will dominate the world. Now, COVID, the global pandemic, will not change this trend, because this trend is coming from two fundamental forces that are still here with us. First, demographics. Asia contains about 4 billion people, which is a larger share of the world population. About half of the world lives in Asia. And the catching up of technology that we have seen in the previous decades is likely to continue in the coming years. So we're going to continue seeing this shift to the east after the global pandemic. Now, the second trend that I want to highlight is technology. And I want to start with a paradox about technology. Now, we all talk about the world is moving faster than ever. At the business, at the technology level, we talk about disruption accelerating. But at the same time, innovation has not been paying off. If you look at the productivity growth of the most advanced economies, it has been trending downwards for the last 60 years. In fact, you see every decade we've been going down from above 3% to about 1% today, and the only positive thing you see is a small blip, a small increase associated to the internet during the 1990s. But COVID, the global pandemic, might be about to change this pessimistic outlook. Why? Because in some cases, we've seen now in many companies in many sectors over the last year, increasing interest in technology. Of course, social distance has created a momentum for technology adoption and for many companies a rethinking of the strategies going forward. As an example, if you look at some companies that are heavily depending and benefiting from a remote world, we see explosion in the growth of these companies, whether it's Amazon, whether it's companies specialized in digital payments, fintech, etc. Now, this acceleration that we're seeing because of COVID coincides with what I think is an inflection point in some of these technologies. Remember what I said earlier, some of these technologies have been there, but they didn't pay off. Why didn't they pay off? Maybe because they were not mature enough. So we see signs that some of these technologies are becoming mature. Now they're having a real impact on value creation and productivity. Whether it's automation, digitalization, artificial intelligence, increasing use of big data, we are likely to see, and we hope we will see, an increased result out of these technologies. Some of us think about the next decade as the roaring 20s. Why do we call them like that? Because that's what we call the 1920s, about 100 years ago, where we also saw a large increase in technology adoption. Now let me mention the third trend. The world has become more unequal over recent decades. In particular, inequality among individuals has been increasing. The wealthiest people in the world keep owning an increasing share of the world's wealth. Now, COVID has unfortunately accelerated this trend. If you look at the top 10 richest persons in the world, in the last year, they accumulated an additional $500 billion in wealth, about $500 billion in accumulated wealth. But that inequality also applies to businesses or to sectors. For example, among industries, we've seen some sectors, whether it's semiconductors, software, hardware, media, or healthcare, dominating the business world, dominating the stock market. And even within a sector, we see the same phenomenon. Within a sector, we see the leader doing better every time and creating even more distance relative to the followers. And what is happening here is an increasing appearance of network effects within these industries, so the bigger companies can dominate. And also the type of disruption that we discussed earlier when it comes to technology, that disruption has created in some sector big winners that create an environment that I'm going to call a winner-take-all environment. There's a bigger distance between number one and number two. Now, let me move from these trends and let me think about what are the factors, the success factors that companies need to take into account as they face these trends. Let me start with the first one, which is about people. Skills and talent matter more than ever. This winner-take-all dynamics that I described earlier means that the distance between the number one and the number two in a sector is going to get bigger. Now, to be able to compete or to be the number one, you need the best talent. And talent is not just in a fixed supply, it's not just about hiring the best people, it's also about developing that talent internally. When I talk about talent, don't just think about quality, think also about diversity. Diversity cannot be emphasized enough these days. When we think about a complex world, a changing world, when we think about a diverse set of stakeholders that companies need to address, we need also a diverse set of employees and a diverse set of skills. As an example, you might think that a traditional, tough CFO will be the right person to deal with Wall Street. But that same person might not have the right skills to deal with NGOs or other stakeholders that are demanding ESG goals or they are demanding impact investment. Diversity does matter more and more every day. The second factor that I want to highlight, not a surprise, is going to be technology again. My belief is that it's time now to take advantage of everything that technology has to offer. Let's make sure that technology pays off. Now, how do we do that? How do we take advantage of technology? Well, I'll say something obvious. Technology needs to be embedded in the business strategy. It is indeed obvious, but is many times rarely executed well. What happens is the best hardware, the best software, the best IT processes get lost because they don't mean much if they are not embedded and embraced by the employees within the organization, and they need to be tailored, these IT processes, to serve the customers. Now, how do you do that? In part by bringing talent. Here we go back to the first factor. Talent is going to be crucial to establish a bridge between the business side and the technology side. Now let me bring the last factor. The last factor is going to be the environment in which firms operate. Now businesses today cannot just think about short-term profits. That's not enough. There's a variety of stakeholders that they need to address. They need to address the social and physical environment. And obviously the experience we just went through with COVID has reminded us that nature matters, that we depend on nature. So this is likely to be yet another inflection point to think about issues like climate change, but also to think about some of the social issues related to the inequality that I mentioned earlier. And the moment we talk about the environment, the moment we talk about social issues, we have to understand governments will have to play a role. And here we have to think about a partnership between business and governments. That partnership requires that businesses understand governments and that governments understand businesses as well. So both governments and businesses have to find ways to communicate and to work together. Now there is one additional aspect about the environment which is important. I'm going to call it the international environment. Now we've talked a lot about globalization and how it's being affected by COVID. We are all becoming a lot more national, a lot more local. We're thinking that maybe we're going to reverse globalization. Now, I disagree with that. I think globalization will be changed, but it will not be reversed. I think internationalization, the management of supply chain, having partners across the world will remain to be key. No company can do everything. Ecosystems today matter more than before. They're central, and ecosystems will require partners which are all over the world. Yes, we're gonna have to redraw supply chains, sure. We might have to diversify them, for sure. But we cannot ignore the opportunities that a global economy offers to successful companies. Now, let me finish with a last reflection. I think COVID has shown to all of us that we cannot take anything for granted. So words like innovation, agility, resilience are key words to prepare ourselves and our companies for whatever future changes the world will bring. Thank you very much.